So good morning, everybody. I want to just, again, welcome everyone to our conference, our 5th year. It's amazing to see everyone in person. And, our first panel today is going to be, I think, really, really exciting for everyone. Frank talked about collaboration and connectivity. And, what I think you will find in this first panel is all 5 of our panelists are firm believers of that and actually are collaborating and connecting with each other. But more importantly, our first panel, everyone here in their own way are innovators and disruptors to the cannabis industry, but disruptors in a positive way. So whereas cannabis in many ways started as, everyone talked about real estate play, retail, pharmaceuticals, our next group, our group of panelists and their companies and platforms are showing us that it's not just that. It's also about e-commerce. It's also about technology. And I think we're going to have a very, very interesting panel, very interesting discussion. It may devolve or evolve into a fireside chat. I'd probably be put off to the side and all just going to talk amongst themselves. But let me just make some quick introductions, and then I think what we're going to start off with is a case study in innovation. So first we have Nina French, who's president, employer and law enforcement solutions for Hound Labs. Nina is a recognized leader with 30 years of experience in screening, so screening for OUI, DUI, whatnot. She has deep understanding of drug testing program design, policies, and technologies, and is a frequent speaker at conferences. Then we have Kathy Corby Inuzelli. I know you so well, and I butcher your last name. She is the co-founder and chief payment officer for KindTap. After years of watching the cannabis industry struggle under heavy regulations, Kathy has been incredibly impassioned, but more importantly involved in terms of fixing what was broken or missing in the industry, which is a modern payment solution that works within the stringent cannabis regulations, but also banking regulations, and it's offering one of the first credit solutions for B2C transactions in the country. Then we have Meredith Mahoney. She is president of Lantern, which, as probably all of you know who've been walking around Boston, around every garbage can as we were talking about. But Lantern is among the leading cannabis e-commerce and delivery platforms in the United States, focusing on the B2C component of e-commerce. And we're excited to have her here as well. Colby McKenzie, he's one of the co-founders of Enlighten. Enlighten, amongst other things, has just introduced what's called Smart Hub, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. But Colby lived the dream of most lawyers. He started off as a lawyer at Weil and then escaped and formed his own sweat equity fund. And then with that sweat equity fund, he got more and more involved in cannabis and now serves as the co-founder and is very active with Enlighten. And last but not least, we have Jay Wigadoski, who's Director of Customer Success and Chief Compliance with WebJoint. And WebJoint is a B2B concept for online delivery, helping not just retail, but also wholesalers have their brands reach across California and probably across the country. So I probably butchered everyone's actual company description. I'll allow you all to fix it for me. But first, I think what we want to do is start off with about 40-second video, and this is the beginning of a case study in innovation, but also disruption in a good way.
Hey, so I'm leaving you. Now that KindTap offers cashless payments for industries that have always been cash only, I really don't need you anymore. It's over. I really don't need you anymore. Stop. We're done. Go away. Just go away.
Great. So Kathy, tell us, what is KindTap? Tell us how you're innovating but also disrupting the market.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I've been a payments executive for a long time, and in the payments industry, we say that payments is like electricity. Nobody thinks about it until it goes out. Well, extending that analogy, you could say that cannabis payments have been in a perpetual blackout. Those of you in this room who are operators know better than I the cost and security issues of running a cash-intensive retail business. You certainly have issues that have become worse in the last 18 months with COVID as the business has moved towards online ordering or delivery. And you know, if I'm sitting home and I didn't order and I didn't pay for it because there's no way to pay in advance when you make the order, I'm tired, I don't show up to pick it up. Or worse yet, the delivery driver shows up and the person doesn't have enough cash on hand, and so they go back with the goods and having wasted a trip. And there are hidden costs as well. Cannabis, if you think about it, is the only business where consumers have to think first about how they're going to pay before they decide when they're going to purchase, what they're going to buy, and where they're going to shop. That's just ridiculous. And I know that there are also a lot of situations that take place in your stores every day, like what happens to me. I show up at the dispensary, and that's when I remember I forgot to hit up the Bank of America ATM where I can get cash for free. And so I have to make a decision. Do I pay the $5.50 to use the ATM in the dispensary, where I'm not only paying the ATM operator but my bank, or do I just buy less and limit myself to what's in my wallet at that time? We know that there are tricks of the trade in retail that you can't take advantage of. Things like creating opportunities for upselling or impulse purchases. If the consumer can only spend as much money as is in their pocket at that time or in their bank account. About 3 years ago, a group of cannabis and payments industries were discussing this and decided it shouldn't have to be this way. In spite of the fact that Visa, MasterCard, and the payment networks want nothing to do with cannabis, we still should be able to come up with a way to pay for cannabis the way payments work in every other industry. And so we got together and set out building towards a vision. And that vision was of integrated, frictionless experiences at the point of sale with no new processes or hardware in the store, no apps that consumers have to open up when they walk into the store. We envisioned pay now and pay later options so that customers, especially medical patients, can purchase the product when they need it and not have to worry about running out before payday. Where retailers can smooth the flow of traffic throughout the week and not have such long lines going out the door on paydays. We envisioned the opportunity to reward customers for their purchases and use that as a way to shape consumer behavior, to nudge them towards higher margin products or to get them to shop during off-peak periods. We envisioned a payment system where all money flows through regulated financial institutions with nothing converted to cryptocurrencies or housed in digital wallets or prepaid cards. And we envisioned a network where all of the providers involved are regulated, scaled, secure financial processors who are in it for the long haul. And so over the last couple of years, we set about building that. And we went live with our Pay Now product, Bank Pay, earlier this year. And this week, we're launching our revolving credit product up here in New England. The way we did this is we created a closed loop payment system where all money flows through regulated financial institutions. While the credit product that we offer looks and acts like a credit card, Visa and MasterCard and the rest of the payment networks have nothing to do with KindTap. All funds flow through bank-to-bank transfers from regulated financial institutions, and we operate under the supervision of our bank partners and their regulators. And when we authorize a transaction and tell a merchant that it's approved, we guarantee it. If the consumer doesn't come through and there's a loss, we take that. So to me, it feels as if we've accomplished the vision of making payments work in cannabis the way they work in every other business. Or as I like to say, we figured out how to keep the lights on.
So that's fascinating, and I think it's very well needed in the industry. And I think when we talk about the industry, we often talk about an ecosystem, and we all interconnect with each other. Payment obviously is very important for everyone else on the platform because I think everyone wants to get paid. So what I'm curious to hear about from the other panelists is what they're doing with their platforms and how they're looking to disrupt the traditional mode of cannabis sales and how it's sold throughout the country. Maybe we can start with Maureen, and you kind of tell us a little bit about Lantern and what's going on there. And also I want to hear about the incubator.
Yeah, Meredith.
I'm sorry.
No, not the first time that's happened. So the concept of Lantern is pretty simple. It's a cannabis e-commerce marketplace and delivery platform. Our hypothesis is that consumers shop in marketplaces across every other product category. It's very rare for a customer to shop directly from a brand or just, with one store. Maybe an exception is like Apple, you buy your phones there, but across everything else you buy, you shop in marketplaces for price choice, for brand choice. You want to get it when you want it, whether that's in 15 minutes or tomorrow or, whenever. Today, when a customer wants to order cannabis online, unless they shop with Lantern, they have to go to a specific dispensary website to order that. That behavior should happen, but we also need to have the marketplace for consumers to give them choice. So right now in Boston, we're operating with about 6 or 7 partners. Some of you are in the room today. We're also operating in Detroit and Denver. Where we come in from a disruption standpoint is actually not that disruptive from a consumer experience standpoint. It's pretty normal the way we're presenting the shopping experience, but it's disruptive to cannabis.
And so I'll try not to butcher anyone else's names, but I cannot promise that. Colby, what are you guys doing at Enlighten?
Sure. So I think I was probably invited to this esteemed panel because we fit uniquely into the cannabis ecosystem, particularly on the e-commerce side, in that we solve 2 critical choke points, one of which, as many of us are familiar with the laws state over state, you have an issue where e-commerce in most states is still tethered to brick and mortar, and therefore Enlighten allows a bridge between the digital and the physical world, wherein you can have that menu syncing, POS integration, order fulfillment, or even the order cue boards that Domino's has made so famous, so you know where you stand in line and things like that, to really allow e-commerce and the brick and mortar to have a more cohesive environment, which, to Meredith's point, in a normal non-cannabis world is something that we don't even think about, but in cannabis, it becomes much more difficult and something that Enlighten has middleware to solve. And then similarly, because we've been sitting at the point of sale inside of brick and mortar for over 5 years, we've really developed a robust understanding of exactly who the cannabis consumer is and how to reach them, and therefore offer a lot of these e-commerce platforms the ability to really hyper-target and find the exact customers that they are trying to drive to their sites to sell them cannabis virtually.
And so, Jay, how are you and WebJoint, how are you sort of disrupting the sort of natural retail ecosystem?
Yeah, for us, we're a California-focused company, so we operate about 1/3 of the delivery services use our software as a business management solution. So everything from e-commerce, inventory management, metric integration, delivery driver tracking, tracking inventory in the trunk of vehicles in California. We've also developed a direct-to-consumer platform. So typically, people would go to a dispensary or a delivery service to find their specific product that they like. But we've changed the game a little bit in California and have allowed brands to now sell directly to consumers through a network of delivery service operators. So we are kind of in an interesting position because as much of a technology platform as we are ourselves, we also integrate with Colby's company and Kathy's company to provide a seamless integration at any POS system, essentially, for inventory management as we scale across the country, and obviously the pay ahead style of payments that Kathy was mentioning a few minutes ago. So we kind of touch a bunch of different companies and kind of just fit in that sense.
Oh, great. And certainly not last but not least, Nina, Hound Labs is kind of on the forefront as well. And I think it's timely in the sense that Amazon, for a while was telling folks we're going to drug test you randomly, and you could have smoked marijuana, 3 weeks ago, and you might have come up on a random test, and then you were dismissed.
Right.
They've recently changed that, but I think you guys are really going to be disruptive to the whole concept of drug testing.
Right, and drug testing, I appreciate being asked to be here. I definitely am recognizing that we're a little bit outside of the normal fringe of things, but drug testing has really been in place since 1986. I actually came out of that Reagan White House and started in this industry, and it hasn't changed much. Every state has different laws. Each of those laws vary by ways you test, how you test. There are 300 million annual drug tests done in workplace and in criminal justice, and none of those tests actually accurately indicate if marijuana or cannabis use was recent or not. So Hound Labs, we set out in 2014 to figure out how can you do that, to make a test that allows cannabis use to be both fair and then balance safety in the workplace and on the roadside. We thought it would take a lot shorter of a time, but we are moving to the market in Q1 with the first marijuana breathalyzer, cannabis breathalyzer, that allows law enforcement and employers, just like you said with Amazon, to see if the use was recent. And by recent, it means about 4 to 6 hours. When people ask what is the impairment standard, there isn't one. It took us about 120 years to get here for alcohol, and it's still changing. And so what Hound Labs did is look at the data that's available to us on when peak impairment is, and that's from NHTSA. And we've determined that in breath, cannabis only lasts for about 4 to 6 hours. And so we believe that it brings to responsible employers and to roadside a solution so that you do not penalize people who are responsibly using in home legally, and you do have a way to maintain safety and really keep drug testing as part of your risk mitigation strategy as an employer. And so we are navigating the same waters that many of you are with the different states and legalization.
So, as we've been talking over the past couple of days and last week, it came to me, and probably all of you were like, well, it was obvious, but I mean, what e-commerce in many ways is doing is disruptive of the concept that you need brick and mortar for retail. And I know all of you, this is obvious to you guys, but maybe you want to kind of explain how you're doing that. Do you really believe retail in terms of brick and mortar will we always need brick and mortar to a certain extent? Is it going to always go? Or are we going to live in a world where we just order online?
I think, if you don't mind, I'll take this one off. I think that with COVID just happening or still happening today, we're recognizing that e-commerce is leading the forefront when it comes to just shopping in general. It's a little bit safer for people that are worried about COVID. It's a lot more convenient for the consumer, with the exception of payments, but that's being solved now as well. Our business saw about a 300% increase over the course of COVID. Our numbers this year compared to last year are just absolutely astronomical in terms of what people are doing and how they're shopping. I think a really big point is that if you're looking to do e-commerce as a business and go straight forward with e-commerce only, you're really reducing the amount of overhead that you would have needed in a brick and mortar service anyway. So now your website becomes much more important. The look, the aesthetic, the feel, all of that is really where you're branding yourself and separating yourself as a business and as a brand. And I think in that sense, e-commerce is definitely where we're going to be living. I mean, Amazon set the pace. Companies like Lantern are doing a great job at really providing a marketplace where people can go to, and our clients as well are providing really great solutions for for consumers.
But just, I'm sorry, Cole.
I was going to say, I do think we have to be careful, though, because one of the tools that we have is we actually track foot traffic inside of dispensaries. And if you use COVID as an indicator of probably hyper-acceleration into e-commerce, people that otherwise would go into brick and mortar or trying to stay away, you saw it go from where it was down to about 55% at like peak days of COVID, and that's already bounced back to 80% of historic traffic inside of dispensaries. And so while I believe e-commerce is exciting and allows cannabis to function just like other industries, I always hesitate to overemphasize that it'll all of a sudden mitigate brick and mortar because they've already bounced back to 80% of kind of historic foot traffic, even in the midst of COVID.
So, sorry.
I was just going to weigh in. I fully agree. Omni-channel retailers are the strongest retailers across any industry. Like, they have higher customer lifetime value. You see that across grocery, across furniture, across apparel. You know, Amazon is opening stores. There was a study that recently came out around grocery where customers that not only used Instacart but also shopped in store had the highest lifetime value of any other grocery customer if they were in one single lane. So, you know, you do need e-commerce. That is the way that the world has been going and is going. You need delivery, but you also need that in-store experience. It serves different needs for the customers, and they don't have one need for their entire relationship with cannabis. They need different things at different times.
So, you know, in many states, there's concentration limits on the terms of the number of retail stores. And so in Massachusetts, we have the rule of 3. You can have 3 medicinal, 3 adult use. Is this a way to kind of disrupt that model or that land grab? So to the extent, you know, for a lot of MSOs are coming in, and where there's concentration limits, they're concerned, well, you know, we don't want to be limited to 3 stores, we want 20, right, to saturate the, you know, the marketplace or whatnot and gain the market share. But is this disruptive of concentration rules? This entire ecosystem that you all are creating?
Disruptive to the basic laws of economics, right?
Well, sure.
Kind of messes up the supply and demand when it limits how many dispensaries you can have open. But I do think because of the amount of dispensaries that certain states have, it leads people to prefer delivery. We were talking about it before. If I have to do the math and it's going to take me an hour to get to a dispensary and then sit there for an hour in some of these states, perhaps then it makes sense to do delivery. Whereas if I'm already out and about and passing a dispensary, then all of a sudden it functions like the grocery store and I pop in rather than, to your point earlier, with Instacart. And so I think the omni-channel approach definitely makes sense. But in states that are very limited, Massachusetts being one of them, it does kind of change the math on kind of how the timing of everything works.
And so, I'm sorry. So it seems to me brands. So everyone wants to create their own brand in cannabis, and there are some national brands, but there seems to be very few. Does e-commerce as a disruptive force or an innovative force, does it raise the game for brands? Like, is it now going to be even more important to have a brand? And how important is it for your individual companies to establish your brand across the various channels?
I think brand is always important, and good retailers, and whether it's brick and mortar or e-commerce, they're always, needing to create a sticky brand that the customers can relate to and remember. Marketplaces like ours at Lantern are driven by brands in other consumer categories. Like I've been in beauty, like that is all about brands, and apparel, all about brands. There's just, again, this is my theme throughout everything I'm going to say. If you look to other consumer categories, that is the way that cannabis is going to go. Today, outside of a handful of brands, there are no national brands. And so, yes, it's a perfect time for founders and innovators to be creating brands within their states and then eventually taking those to a national audience. And marketplaces are going to be a key platform for those brands to get recognition and get exposure to customers.
And then,
if I can just add that brands exist to create trust with consumers, that they know what they're getting, it's reliable, it's repeatable. And when you set out to build a brand, you need to make sure that you can deliver on it, because you can spoil a brand by one bad experience if you lose the trust of the consumer.
Yeah, I think that's part of why our direct-to-consumer platform was, brought and incepted to begin with. We were tired of having to go to weed maps to find our favorite brand's product, find a retailer that was a verified retailer and carrier of that product and legitimizing it. And it just makes sense to be able to bring e-commerce to the brand itself and utilize and leverage a delivery network across the entire state of California, for example, where you can just go straight to Stizzy, for example, or some other major brand that's your favorite brand, find the product that you're looking for, place an order, and know that 100% of the time it's going to be the same product, it's verified, it's been tested, it's an actual legitimate unit that you're getting.
And so Nina, you're going to market Q1 for Hound Labs. How does Hound Labs, in its beginning stage, create its brand? And maybe that's a good question.
Well, it's actually good to start with the story. So Hound Labs came about because our founder is both a medical, a doctor and a deputy sheriff, and an avid cyclist. And he's a California-based company. And a dog's nose is about 1,000 times more sensitive than a human's nose. And so what we did is set about to establish a brand that really does promote this idea of safety and fairness and legitimacy within the cannabis industry, that we are responsible. It is an industry that's lasted, for drug testing, everybody seems to think it's novel, and why haven't we solved for this? It's been around for 20 years. The drug screening industry sort of sat staunchly opposed and said, cannabis is first of all evil. You saw Ronald Reagan up there, right? So that's where we were born and bred from. I actually left my own consulting firm and came to launch this product with Hound because both the brand, the message, and what the technology is able to do is critical to what we do in the United States and then eventually in the world, and being able to allow responsible use where it is legal, but yet have a means to which we can control risk in the workplace and risk on the roadside. And that's really what it's about. It's a part of a company's risk mitigation strategy, and our brand is here to promote the concept of legitimacy and responsible use.
And I did not pick up on the Hound's nose being so technical, and that's awesome. It's so sensitive. That is an awesome way to create that brand, that image.
And we are, unfortunately, it was an extraordinary feat, much bigger than we thought, to detect these. It's 1 billion, it's a 1 billionth of a specific molecule that we're looking for. On the way, we were able to detect COVID, turns out. It's an extraordinary technology that has, we have 12 patents and 29 additional. So it's an extraordinary technology that we believe will be able to be used for other things as well. But the importance for this is that it allows that responsible use. People are losing their jobs. It isn't just, things that are disrupting their little world. People are losing their jobs or can be convicted of an offense that they did not based on existing drug testing technology.
So just to change the narrative just a little bit, it seems to me also that all of you are collecting or aggregating data, right? And I guess the question is, how important is privacy laws? What do you do in terms of compliance around privacy, around cybersecurity? Because that's what everyone's concerned about. Every other month, someone's credit card gets broken into, and you have to change all your accounts and passwords. How important is data privacy to you guys, and what are you doing about it, if anything?
It's of paramount importance because you're dealing with a product category that's not legal across the United States. You have people that, are in situations that they may be, have security clearance. They may, be in the military. They may be teachers. They may have reasons that, they do not want that consumption public. We have 2 security engineers on our team of 25, which is a lot. Some companies of many, many tens of thousands of people have 1. I have been in, digital e-commerce for a long, long time, and it is, to your point, your worst nightmare to wake up and have a data breach. You cannot recover that trust with your customers. So yeah, we're doing, I would say, above and beyond what a lot of other companies are doing.
But would you agree that's maybe one place inside of cannabis where we are similar and can leverage the same tools that everybody has access to? Because data is non-plant touching.
Yeah.
We get to kind of use everybody else's tools that they're used to leveraging to. So I think cannabis, much like most industries, is using the same tools and the same software to make sure that we're encoding and encrypting and keeping our data safe, to your point, even perhaps more so than other industries.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that statement. You know, we're using Amazon Web Services for all of our encryptions and everything like that, which is an industry standard at this point. So it's definitely paramount. Data is not something you can take lightly, especially when you're talking about personal information. And, you know, I've heard lots of conversations about HIPAA compliance and things along those lines when it comes to consumer data. So, you know, you've got to make sure you take care of that.
And being in payments, we of course have data issues, but we also have the money. And so you break into us, you get the money. And so we felt it was incredibly important to only work with processors that were established and secure. And even our app that we use, we kept it dumb. We don't have any functionality or any data that's stored in the app, and that was purposeful because you can never secure an app the way you can secure a large payment processor.
And I will say that for us, although drug testing is not covered under HIPAA, we follow HIPAA and ISO certification because we will sell through consumer reporting agencies. They are the biggest sales agencies for drug testing. And so with that, you have every piece of PII on a human being possible, you know, where they went to high school, where they went to grade school, if their neighbors like them. So we made sure that in development with our analyzer that we have a database into which the results go. That data is as important as anything else. It will help us look at trends in the industry, seeing where that elusive sort of impairment level will eventually come to fruition. But we also had to make sure that we are as secure as possible and took it very seriously because we have a wealth of data on everyone through our integrations with our sales partners.
Well, with data, with privacy, you know, with how important compliance is across the board in cannabis, you know, all of you are focused in a couple of states here and there. What do you envision in terms of how do you scale, whether it's nationally or even more of a regionally, or do you have a vision of scaling along those lines, and sort of what are the compliance issues with scaling to a more, let's say, you know, national or super regional footprint?
We might be the largest scaled, so I can go first.
Sure.
I think at this point we're in every legal cannabis state.
Okay.
And scaling across every legal cannabis state is a massive pain in the ass. Every time, as a plant touching company, you cross the state line and you basically have a hard line. You must have a new license. As a can tech company, theoretically it's easy. You can scale nationally across state lines. But what you don't think about as you start to scale is each state you have to view not only from a customer acquisition point, completely different, but from a compliance point, from a regulatory point, from just how the state operates. In certain states, retailers have more power. In certain states, the manufacturers have more power. And so it's basically like operating across 50 countries when you operate across 50 states, given how the laws differ so greatly.
I think it's pretty interesting how from state to state metric, for example, can be a little bit different
Sure.
too, because the supply chain is different. So, you know, for us, I think we're in about 6 or 7 different states and 2 countries, Canada included now. And taxes are a big thing, right? When you talk about compliance. In California, you're a destination-based tax state. So every single city that you deliver to has a different tax rate. And good luck finding a centralized database that has local taxes for cannabis in California. Here in Massachusetts, it's kind of like a straight across the board excise tax with your sales and use tax, right? So, you know, it's a matter of kind of teeter-tottering, I think, between compliance based on which state you're going to.
And Kathy, it seems to me, for you all, I mean, there's compliance in terms of obviously the state cannabis regulatory rules and regulations, but you're also dealing, if not mistaken, with banking regulations that may differ from state to state. So how do you navigate that as you look to, grow, have a national footprint? Or is it even an issue?
It was in our knowledge of the ecosystem was there from the beginning. And so we designed the solution so that, for instance, using partner banks so that we leverage their licenses, and so we don't have to think about licensing at the state level just for money movement, which seems kind of a silly thing that you have to have a license to move money from state to state, even if you're legal federally. But also in things like lending money, you have to have a license to lend consumers money in most states or meet certain requirements. And so we're investing a lot of money in attorneys to make sure that we have the right licenses in place where we need them. And then we kind of designed, as I said from the beginning, we designed for scale. So we went into this knowing what we were getting into. Very different from some of the earlier cannabis payment solutions that started with the proverbial 2 guys in a garage and then figured out, oh no, what do we do now? We started with this is where we're going to be, and so this is what we need in place. And now we're just methodically going through the process of getting there.
And Nina, what about your company? I mean, obviously, I think there's less issues.
Oh, I wish.
Okay, never mind.
No, there's no less issues. Each state has either no law regarding drug testing in workplace, or they have voluntary laws. They have mandatory laws by industry. And much of those laws don't mention breath for drug because it didn't exist. So you are sort of navigating these 30 and 40-year-old laws who oftentimes nobody even knows who wrote them in those states. So you're navigating within those states really against nothing, right? So we're trying to figure out there is nothing that prohibits it, so we can sell. So we sell in all 50 states, and then we will wait to see as the laws change in those states, hopefully just to identify a parent compound in drugs, how, if there will be any challenges. But we're often really just sort of looking in there and saying there's nothing that prohibits, and so it's allowed.
And so along with compliance, which is important, and in certain scaling, what has become extremely important to the cannabis industry, I mean, we used to talk about social equity or social justice. Now we're talking about ESG, which is just a continuation. How important is that, do you think, to the cannabis industry? How important is it to your various platforms? And Meredith, I got the name right this time, but don't comment next time. I know you guys are doing an incubator, so I'm just kind of curious what you all are doing and how important is it?
So we founded Lantern with the consumer at the heart of it, as well as the social equity community. And my co-founder and I were like, we're not going to do this if we don't work on the social equity piece as a key component of our business strategy. And I think it's very important for me to say it's part of our business strategy. It is not a CSR initiative that sits off to the side and we have one person running it, we throw money at it. It's integral to what we do. We actually started our mass incubator program before we even incorporated Lantern 2 years ago. And we're in the delivery space in mass, as you all know, with the third-party delivery regs and the exclusive period. It just made a lot of sense for us to find entrepreneurs that wanted to start delivery companies, support them, bring in, attorneys, bring in people that can teach, how to do business modeling, how to find financing. By the way, that's the biggest missing piece of the puzzle, as you all know. Stood that up in mass. It's been incredibly successful. We've had about 40 people go through the program. We've done four cohorts, and then we stood that up both in Detroit and Denver. And in Detroit, we're actually working with the city to run their incubator program there. Again, my goal is that if I fall off this planet and someone else has to run this company and they don't care at all about social equity, they can't walk away from it because it's driving the dollars into the business. So I think it's incredibly important.
I think we found our place in social equity applicants in Los Angeles specifically, more from an educational standpoint, providing resources in terms of how to stay as a compliant business, how to run a cannabis delivery service to begin with, and just how to run a business in general. We've found that there's a lot of missing resources at the educational level, specifically in California for social equity applicants. And so where we found our niche is let's educate social equity applicants to begin with. That way they can become successful operators later on. And if they use our software, great. If they choose some other software, that's totally fine too. But at least we've been able to ground ourselves in education.
We similarly backed the education piece, and what we learned is that getting a social equity license is one phase or one step of many, and from that point is really where a lot of times the social equity applicant gets left. It's like, we feel good, we got you the application, good luck.
Yeah.
And so to the education point, stepping in from that point forward to the actual opening of the door, Enlighten launched, it's been about 18 months ago, a program called See Beyond. And in that, we try and provide turnkey solutions so that you can take a bundle of both our products and other partners' products and say, here is everything you need to open your dispensary. From a technology perspective, you can at least check this box and begin to focus on the many other items, financing being, again, the biggest one to your point. But at least if you help solve the educational piece and help offer something to get the doors open, you're giving people the opportunity to actually take to fruition what the programs are actually designed to do.
And certainly, I agree with Meredith. I mean, one of the biggest issues is financing. I mean, it's huge for the entire industry, period, but oftentimes it's a really difficult hurdle for social justice or social equity applicants. And Nina, it seems to me that given how people of color are disproportionately arrested, stopped, that your technology is extremely important for that.
It is. It's an objective measure, and that's the key, right? Whatever the measure is, it's objective. And so we provide on-site a result that says negative or non-negative. It doesn't say anything beyond that. And then it's forensically defensible. So that same exact sample that you take on the roadside or at an employer site can then be sent to one of the premier laboratories in the country, have an LCMS run on it, which is really the highest standard. And then there's actually a third evidentiary sample that's retained with that individual cartridge that allows an applicant to protest the specimen either legally or within their organization and have it tested again. And so we really wanted to make certain that it was fair and defensible for both the person who's giving the test and then the people who are taking the test. And that was really key to what we do.
And it seems to me that in your respective platforms, there are a lot of competitors in the non-cannabis industry. And so I guess my question to you all is, are you worried that as cannabis becomes more mainstream, and even without, say, end of prohibition, are you worried about competition as people say, oh, I can do this too? Like, for instance, I mean, obviously we know Laren spun out of Drizzly as part of the whole Uber transaction. Are you, Meredith, are you concerned about Uber coming in or Grubhub or any of these other?
No. I mean, alcohol has been legal for 100 years. Alcohol delivery has been happening for 10 years, and Uber tried to do it a few times on their own and couldn't do it, and that's why they're acquiring Drizzly. These big public companies are not going to have the expertise to build things for 36 states and hopefully one day 50 states. Going back to the question, I think, which was maybe one of the most interesting of the panel, is how do you scale nationwide? You have to be well-funded, you have to be technology-centric, you have to have excellent leadership, and a very deep knowledge of regulations and a social equity strategy that scales nationwide, that addresses each market. The Ubers of the world don't have those things. And also, they don't want to invest in the amount of money and resources it would take to build that up from scratch. So, we're all going to be acquisition targets one day. I think it'll,
Fingers crossed.
whether we're all acquired or we go, become, get traded on the stock exchange, hopefully one day. I think it's going to be a matter of how long legalization takes, how many markets we can all get into, and it's just going to be like a very interesting and wild ride over the next 4 or 6 years.
And I think that's the key, right? If you were in the industry early, everybody was like, you have to go super fast. You have 48 months and all the big guys are going to show up, and then 5 years later, they're still not here. And it's like, you have to go super fast. You have now 6 months until all the... So we've been afforded a pretty sizable amount of time. And I assume even if you see certain regulations begin to come down the pipe, we will be afforded more time. If you can't build a sustainable moat, whether that's intelligence, whether that's expertise within it, like you probably don't deserve to survive when the competitors show up. So from our perspective, I'm sure everybody takes a similar approach. Like you've been afforded a allotted amount of time. You have to maximize it to make sure you are positioned whenever those walls do come down to either be acquired because the buy-build analysis comes out in your favor, or stand up against those guys because you've built an expertise in the industry.
And I think, at least from our perspective, there's still a significant amount of naivete about how complicated it is. People think, well, this can't be that hard. People think, well, if it comes off of a Schedule 1, this goes away, or this changes dramatically. And it really doesn't. There is, again, it's not a brand new industry. And yet the amount of knowledge outside of a very limited circle of the complexities of it are hard. And so the mastery and the discipline in the knowing and creating to those regulations, I think is pretty key to it. And it does create the moat, because people just do not realize how big of a mountain they have to climb to understand it all. And you never stop digging. It seems like, I'm 30 years in and I'm like, really? That happened? So I think that's really key.
I use this analogy all the time when I'm talking to people about the cannabis industry. And if you can imagine a hotel lobby and a parking structure below it, there's 3 different levels of parking. We have not reached parking 1 below the lobby in terms of when we need to actually get there, right? So it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Although it may feel like a sprint every day, it's definitely a marathon.
And what about competition that already exists within the cannabis industry? And I'm going to pick on Kathy for a second, only because I was having this discussion with a banking expert, I guess last night or Sunday night. But for instance, you've come out with this new product. Well, how is it different than, say, cashless ATM? Like I can go in to a lot of dispensaries, give my ATM card, and yeah, there's a little surcharge, but even that's going away bit by bit, or it's coming down. How does KindTap, how do you view that? Are you concerned? Is it even really a competitor?
Okay, let me, I'm a fairly new cannabis customer, having moved to Florida and gotten my medical card. And one of my first purchases, I went into a dispensary and ordered $80 worth of product, 15% first-time customer discount. I used debit, which I slid my ATM card, my debit card, into an ATM terminal on the counter, entered my PIN, and after she clicks around for a few minutes, I had to do it in $10 increments, so I had to get $70 to get my $68 purchase. And after a few minutes, she hands me 2 receipts, one for $73, one for $68, 2 $1 bills. And I'm just like, what? And I asked her to explain it to me, and she did, and I still didn't get it, and I got home and I figured it out. Well, I also got charged $2.50 by Bank of America, because to Bank of America, that was an off-premise ATM transaction. Now, as more and more new customers come into cannabis, they're going to say, excuse my French, what the shit? This is not what mature payments should look like, and it's going to have to be addressed. And by the way, the card associations, the ATM networks are saying, what are these things sitting there dispensing cash in dispensaries? And the rumor is that they're starting to look at that post the situation with ease and saying, do we really want to allow those to continue? So you have to do it compliantly, you have to follow the laws and the regulations, or eventually it will be shut down.
And certainly speaking of ease, I mean, the moral of that story is transparency, 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 which I think is across the board here as well. We're talking, I know we're coming to almost our end of our time, but we're talking about scaling nationally or scaling, and we're talking about money. I think all of you are either in fundraising mode or have completed some rounds. How difficult was it? I mean, plant-touching companies have certain limitations, for a variety of reasons that we've all know about. But you're all non-plant touching technically. Are you experiencing the same institutional obstacles from raising cash? Is it become easier? Is it still just so difficult because people say, well, it doesn't make a difference that you're e-commerce, you're dealing with cannabis companies?
I think it's kind of interesting how investments have changed over the course of the last 5 years, right? 5 years ago, people were investing in ideas. Today, they're looking at hard numbers. And we're under fundraising currently. We're doing public fundraising through crowdfunding on Start Engine. So I can't speak too much on it just due to the regulations, but go check out our Start Engine.
There's no one from the SEC here, so you're all good. But still,
check
be
out
careful.
Our Start Engine page, But no, it's a difference because the industry, as much as an immature industry as it is, it's still maturing in terms of wanting to look at hard numbers, ARR data. There's no longer the concept of investing in an idea that is going to take off in the next 5 years. The ship has already started to sail. We want to look at your numbers and your hard data.
Anyone else?
We just wrapped up some fundraising, and I think the biggest challenge is getting people to really understand what it is you're doing, what the size of your market is. How can you validate the size of the market and what you're doing? How do you explain all of these idiosyncratic things about your market and your space and your regulatory environment to people who just traditionally don't know it? I think that's a challenge. I think also as a company that you're running every day, you feel like you are on a treadmill every day running. And so, it's always challenging to just find the time to do it and do it well.
Sure.
And you can't just chase any money. I mean, you have to be as smart about raising money as you are about building your business so you've got the right money, partners who are going to work with you or leave you alone, whatever makes the most sense, at a valuation that makes sense.
But I do think we're probably in our fourth iteration of kind of cannabis investing and cannabis fundraising. In the early days, like everybody just laughed at you. It was crazy. You would knock on a door and people would just laugh, like cannabis? Yeah, like I came from private equity. I figured I'd call a few buddies, raise some money. It's like, no
Not so
way.
easy, right?
Yeah, so super difficult. And to your point, it was early idea stage companies, very VC type plays. Then you had this crazy run up through 2018. The public market started getting hot. Canadian, you had the RTOs in Canada, very, very hot market. Then all of a sudden it bottomed out like late 18 up through 19. And then the pandemic didn't really help. But what happened was kind of after that bottom out, you saw now coming out a very, very hot market from a capital markets perspective. And everybody is looking at cannabis as a piece of their portfolio going forward. And so I would say now is probably an easier time to fundraise than any time other than that rapid run up through like 2018.
Yeah, I don't think our Start Engine campaign would have, we had the concept years ago, right, to crowdfund, but I don't think it would have been anywhere near as successful as it is today, just due to the times.
Yep.
So it's about maturation of the industry, but also maturation of investors.
Investor education, right?
Right.
And education. So we have 7 minutes or so. I already went over, but do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, back there.
I was interested in what you were talking about with the ATM exchange. Sorry? Oh. Hi, good morning. I was interested about what you were talking about with the ATM and the cashless. How does the industry handle credit cards today?
There are cases where dispensaries are taking credit cards in dispensaries. They are doing it either illegally or out of compliance. Their merchant processor may be doing something illegal or out of compliance with the network rules. In some cases, and they will get shut down. I mean, the networks, these are large global companies who their executives do not want to go to jail. And so they are shutting these things down as fast as they find them. There are other cases where They're maybe in a gray area, but maybe it's not illegal. But when you look behind it, they're using a credit card cash advance transaction. So the consumer is swiping, turning it into cash, and then paying with it. Well, that transaction has usually a $10 minimum charge from the bank, and it causes you to start paying interest from the day of the purchase. And so as consumers start to see these things on their credit card bills, even if it's in the gray area, the consumers are going to say, forget that.
Question, well, since the microphone's over there, back there. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sherry. I'm a data privacy consultant, actually, with Pragma Consulting. And so I was actually excited to hear Scott talk about, or even mention data privacy, because so many of the times we talk about compliance in cannabis, and it's always around cybersecurity, breach response, incident response plans, things like that. So my question is, specifically, I guess, for Jay, Colby, and maybe to some extent Meredith, when you think about compliance and all the other regulations you have, how in the forefront are the other data privacy regs now that California, of course, but Colorado, Virginia just passed their approved privacy regs, and similar to cannabis, there's no federal or omnibus, right? But every state is coming up with a new privacy reg. And I'm specifically interested in the more consumer interfacing regulations, right? Notice, consent, data subject rights. So is it on your radars at all, especially in the e-commerce expansion, or no?
You want to take it first? You want me to take it off, Colby?
I'll just say yes. We're a cannabis tech company, yes, but we think of ourselves as a consumer company, first and foremost, consumer brand. And as I keep saying, consumers have expectations across all of the places they shop online, and all of these privacy regulations haven't been in place for good reason. And I think a lot of the ones that are related to, data tracking on apps and all that, we don't have our app out yet, but we will, and we'll adhere to those. But the consumer piece of PII and data security is very top of mind for us.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I totally echo that. I think we've started to see a pretty big crackdown on people that are utilizing marketing materials without consent for consumers, which is an option that we've built in our e-commerce. By default, you have an option of choosing to opt in or opt out as a consumer. And when we submit apps to the App Store, we're subject to all of Apple's regulations, Android's regulations, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely top of mind.
And for us, perhaps we have a slightly different perspective because we have a MarTech platform, so we have our own proprietary first-party data, but in many ways we're also leveraging second and third-party data to help with that digital targeting. And we had to bring in a super expert chief digital officer over the last year to match the fact that every state is now coming out with different laws, and what used to be easy to grab third-party data is becoming much more difficult to find the exact data sets to say, I'm sending a cannabis ad not only to a 21 plus person, but a 21 plus person that consumes cannabis in this region, because everything is so fragmented in cannabis. A brand, for the most part, is not national and really focused on, can you target somebody in this geographic region that is a known cannabis consumer? To do that, it used to be fairly easy. Now it's becoming much more difficult, but I view that perhaps as a moat because we've found all these unique workarounds and have enough first-party data to allow us to do it. But to your point, it's very difficult as more and more states, as kind of California leading the charge, really to kind of shut a lot of that down.
Question up front, please.
For Nina, I'm Greg Feldman from KDS 3 Strategic Search.
Here comes the mic. Hold on one sec. Thank you.
Hi, Nina. Just if you could clarify exactly what the breathalyzer will measure. Will it measure it will measure the presence? Will it measure levels? Will it measure the time that the product was ingested or smoked?
It actually does measure levels, and it isn't what you smoke or vape. It is what your body is metabolizing out through your lungs. So any way that you ingest cannabis, it comes out of your lungs, and it comes out for about that window that does not extend beyond 6 hours. There's a level. The level's a pretty complex process to get to, because we also need to ensure that we're not getting anything that is environmental in the sample. So we measure all of that. There is a level that is set in any workplace drug testing, and that's how you set it, based on the sensitivity and specificity of the equipment and the test. But it's in picograms. For those of us who paid no attention in science, because I did not, a picogram is identifying a single grain of sand on about a 2-mile beach. So even these large national laboratories like the Quest and the LabCorps, some of their most sensitive equipment has to be adjusted so that they can do our confirmations of our technology. But there is a level. We don't give it, and we don't give it in workplace drug testing in general. It is there and it's available. It's available should someone need that result. But drug testing, when you set a level, is really sort of the concept of pregnant or not, right? It doesn't tell you anything beyond, we know this person used cannabis in that time frame and not longer. And that's what the other ones do, right? They can detect recent use, but they can't isolate it from past use. So we've created a level, and we basically say pregnant or not. What we don't say is, you know, she just gave birth or she just found out she's pregnant. We say you're pregnant or not, because that's really that objective measure that employers need, and they don't have to get into, you know, any other details of it.
Just a follow-up on that, if I may, and forgive me if we've already covered this. Is it safe to assume that there are law enforcement applications for this?
Yes.
And if so, are there sort of standard levels of impairment, if you will, like there are with alcohol breathalyzers, in which they set a standard?
We are going into both the employment and the law enforcement market at the same time. Law enforcement takes longer because it is just individual jurisdictions and states. So we've been working with a lot of states on pilot programs for the device to get out there. They'll do testing. We also have an alcohol sensor with it. THC doesn't act the same way as alcohol. Alcohol behaves very differently than any other thing. And so it behaves like a drug. And so because of that, we measure it differently. There is no impairment standard. And I think Meredith said it, right? We're 120 years into alcohol testing, and we're still adjusting to what the level is. And that's why we found it important to really look at that NHTSA standard of when is peak impairment, and devise a strategy around the time versus the level. But there is a level, but it's really about that time. And it goes beyond, I think, regulatory and scientific. It's kind of common sense, right? You can use outside of the workplace. You cannot use for 6 hours prior to showing up to work or while you are at work. And that's really an easy policy for employers to adopt, and it's an easy policy for law enforcement as well.
So unfortunately, we already went over, and I'm getting the look in the back here, but our panelists, I'm sure, will be around to answer questions you may have. And I just want to thank all of you. You've done great. You've educated me, including learning my client's name, but we'll just forget about that. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.